Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts. We got some fun stuff to talk about today. Jayson Tatum said that the finals is going to be a rematch this year between the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks. DeMar DeRozan said the 2019 Raptors would have won a ring with or without Kawhi. Dwyane Wade's getting a statue. And then we're going to cap it all off by talking about Thursday Night Football. Tua, there's conversations. Is he going to retire because he's just dealt with so many concussions in the past? But it's going to be a fun episode. Jayson Tatum was talking about the 2025 NBA Finals matchup, and he said that it's going to be a rematch. We're going to play Dallas again. And I want to kind of take a look at both teams, where they stand in their conference, and how I think they would stack up in a rematch. Because, it does open conversation topics. Let's start with the Celtics. I think the East is going to be tougher than it has been in recent years because you've got a team like Milwaukee. This is their second year with Dame and Giannis. So now that duo kind of has had their time to build chemistry because that first year, especially with the head coaching change, which I think was unjustified, with the head coaching change, a new coach coming in mid-season, and you also had a star player come in and you lost a guy like Jrue Holiday, that's going to affect your team, especially a star coming in at the point guard position. That just changes the whole dynamic of things. And Giannis had a real good year last year. Dame, not so much. He was technically an all-star starter, but, a lot of that comes down to fan vote. He's so popular. And he had a down year, especially efficiency-wise, and I think it's, for most people, not what we expected in the first year of that. But I think this year the Milwaukee Bucks will be a lot better. We saw it with the Minnesota Timberwolves this year past, where the first year where they make a huge change and bring in a guy like Rudy Gobert, that alters your whole scheme completely. And then they were able to turn that around. And the second year, they were a very good team that made it to the Western Conference Finals. I could see something like that happening to the Bucks. Honestly, I kind of expect that. I think we're a year too early with the Dame and Giannis hype. I think they need a year to work things out, and now also another offseason under new head coach Doc Rivers. I think the second year coming in, I think they will be a lot better right out the gate, and I think that will surprise a lot of people, and I think that success will continue. I think they could very well be the 2 or 3 seed. Who do I think? Obviously, the Celtics, I think, will be the 1 seed. I'll go into them in a second. But who do I think is going to be also in the running for that 2 to 3 seed? That would be the New York Knicks. They made what I really believe is a huge move, and it might not be that big on paper because Mikal Bridges, what he is best at is a role player, and that's why over in Brooklyn it didn't really work out because you asked him to be the first option, and Mikal isn't built to be the first option, but I think he's a perfect fit over in New York. Not only do you have chemistry over from college with guys like Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, but Mikal Bridges gets to be, say, the third option, behind Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. And that's where Mikal is going to thrive because we saw it over in Phoenix when he got to be behind a guy like D-Book. That's where he plays his best because he is not built to be your number one scoring option. He can maybe be your top scorer once a month, and you're okay with that. You don't want him being your top scoring option every night. So to have guys ahead of him like Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, that's going to open up his game a lot. The offense doesn't have to run through him, and he can focus more on defense because that wasn't as good as it usually is when he was playing for the Nets because he had to carry so much of the offensive load. So I think the addition of Mikal is going to be huge for the Knicks, and I think they will be a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference along with the Milwaukee Bucks and Boston Celtics. But to talk about the Celtics for a little bit, because obviously that's the main thing with this topic, is I think they have all that they need to be able to go on another run this year. And obviously there's a talent on the roster. They also picked up Lonnie Walker, who I think is going to be a really good addition for them. But I want to talk about Jayson Tatum specifically, because a lot of the stuff with him in terms of, is he a superstar? Is he a borderline superstar? What is Tatum's spot in this league? Where does he rank among guys? A lot of the issue has been with his mentality and how maybe it doesn't always translate to having the best playoff games. He's definitely inconsistent in the playoffs. You can say what you want about his performance. He's undoubtedly inconsistent. And I think Tatum is going to be he's going to be motivated this year because Jaylen Brown, he won Eastern Conference Finals MVP. He won Finals MVP. So I think while people are going to say, yes, this is obviously Jayson Tatum's team, and I think to me it really showed that he was a superstar because he was able to contribute to winning basketball without being the top scorer on the team. I think Tatum is gonna take a leap and have that mentality this year because he's going to want to prove to himself that he is the number one option on this team and can be the number one scoring option on a championship team. Because really, in the NBA, if you're going to succeed, all the players that succeed, they've got a little bit of ego. So there's nothing wrong in saying that Jayson Tatum is going to need to have a little bit of ego and say, hey, I'm the number one guy on this team. Let me go out, let me get some buckets, and let me prove that to not just myself, but to my team and to everyone watching us. And I think Tatum, I'm hoping at the very least, that he's going to be able to tap into that. And really, I would love to see the Celtics repeat with Tatum winning Finals MVP this time. That's just wishful thinking, really. But I would like to see a mentality shift, and I think it's very possible. One more team I want to talk about in the Eastern Conference before we move over to the West, and the Dallas Mavericks, is the Orlando Magic. They were a very young team last year. They're the 4 seed, or they were the 5 seed. I think they're going to be the 4 seed this year. That's just another year to develop. Markel's not coming back. They're going to have Cole Anthony lead in the front. I think he was my pick for most improved. I mentioned that in my interview with OKC Access. I think Cole Anthony is going to be a very, very good point guard this year. And ultimately, he's a little bit more of a scorer. But that's okay because you've got a little bit of a scoring need. You've got solid guys like Franz, like obviously Paul Banchero, Jalen Suggs, but really a solidified second option, that's probably Franz. But a third, you could have Cole Anthony in that slot, and I think he can do very well. His efficiency has gone up. That's always been the biggest knock on him, but it has been better in the past couple of years. I think Cole Anthony is primed to break out, and the Magic, I think, could very well be the 4 seed this year, just another year for his young team to develop chemistry, and I think Paul could very well make it all. The Dallas Mavericks will have their hands a little bit forward than the Celtics. Do I think Celtics are going to have some competition, as I just talked about? Yes, but ultimately I think they're going to make the finals again, and I could very well see them winning it. But for Dallas, this Western Conference, that's the conference that has generally been the toughest and had the most competition. I don't think that's going to change. Let's start by talking about Denver. I think the loss of KCP is going to be pretty big because that team was perfectly constructed for the modern NBA because he had a solid point guard. You had an elite role player shooting guard. You had a lights-out shooter from 3. You had Aaron Gordon, who has the best two-man game with the most unique offensive weapon we've ever seen, Jokic. So overall, that team works so well together, 1 through 5, and I think the loss of KCP is really going to affect their rhythm, at least in the earlier parts of the year. I think Denver will ultimately be fine and be a top team in the West again, but I think they might have some struggles starting off. OKC, I think it's going to be really good. I think J-Dub could very well take another leap. He was really good last year, averaged, I believe, 19 points. Maybe take a little bit of that scoring load off of SGA. I think him and Chet could do that. SGA, he might average 30 again. He very well could, but he might not because he might not need to. You might have a guy like Chet or J-Dub or some other guys come in and take that scoring load off of him. And I think that would ultimately be better for the health of that team, for the health of Shea, although he's been consistently pretty healthy. I think just having a more well-rounded offense would do wonders for them, and just another year with that team, I think that could very well happen. So OKC is going to be an even stronger team, even deeper team this year, especially with a guy like Cason Wallace. He's coming into his second year, so he's only going to be better. I think this team is going to be deeper and better than ever. Last team I want to touch on before talking about the Dallas Mavericks is the Minnesota Timberwolves, because that was the team they faced in the Western Conference Finals last year. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves, I don't know that they're going to take a leap again, and I don't think they need to, because they were a very good team last year. They had one of the best defenses we've seen in recent memory, and I think that's just going to continue. And maybe the cookie crumbles a different way this year, and they're able to have a little bit more success. And in a rematch against the Mavericks, maybe in the Western Conference Finals, they can say, hey, we're going to go to the finals this year. I say that like, it's all a mentality thing, because really it just comes down to talent. But Anthony Edwards, he's going to have another year, and he's a playoff riser. And guys like Cat, he had a really solid series last year. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves, they can compete with anyone in that Western Conference and really the NBA. So I think the fact that the Dallas Mavericks won in 5 last year, that was really surprising to me, and I think the Minnesota Timberwolves will be back and better than ever. Do I think they're going to take a leap? No, because I think they're going to be just as solid as they usually are. And lastly, for the Dallas Mavericks, I think just having another year of Kyrie and look, I say another year for all these teams, but really, it does help to build chemistry. And this is Derek Lively's sophomore year; he'll only be better. And that's a really good center rotation. The glow up is crazy. You go from Dwight Powell to having Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. That's really good for them. And I wasn't high on the Mavericks. I've never been a huge Luka guy because generally the team success hasn't been there. The team success has been lacking. But now I can't say anything. He's proved me wrong. Luka's a playoff riser. He's always going to be in MVP talks just off his insane production alone. Kyrie is one of the best second options in the entire league. A top 4 shooting guard, I would say. You've got D-Mitch and D-Book and then Kyrie. So, and that wasn't in any order, by the way. But yeah, generally I think that the Dallas Mavericks, they have what it takes for sure. And I doubted them in years past. I can't do that anymore. They've shown they have what it takes, and I could very well see them make it to the Western Conference Finals and the Finals again. And, if they had a rematch with Celtics, maybe they could win. I think the Celtics are going to win it again this year, but the Mavericks could very well be in those conversations and could very well win. It's going to be interesting. The 2019 Raptors would have won the 2019 NBA championship with or without Kawhi. I disagree with it, and you can argue that DeMar, he kind of plays similarly to Kawhi offensively. But in terms of defense, Kawhi is light years ahead of a guy like DeMar. So to have just that excellent all-time two-way piece on your team, that's really significant because you can have a great offensive player, but a scoring wing isn't the most demanding job in the NBA. You can find a lot of scoring wings that don't contribute to winning basketball that much. Look at Zach LaVine. Look at even DeMar, right, for Chicago. That experiment failed entirely. So I think having Kawhi, he just adds another element completely with his defense, his all-NBA, all-defensive team caliber defense. There's no doubt that Kawhi Leonard was crucial to winning that championship, in my opinion. So I don't agree with the fact that you would have won. I disagree with that statement entirely from DeMar DeRozan. I think that they would have been a very good team, yes, but I think Kawhi takes you to that next level. You can see a good team with a lot of depth in the NBA all the time, but then they need a star to really take them to the next level, and that's exactly what Kawhi Leonard was. So I do not think they would have won the 2019 championship without Kawhi Leonard. I think really Kawhi all time, his ranking is it's very interesting to me because his finals MVPs, they come at times where you wouldn't really expect them to, because his first one in 2013 and 2014 in San Antonio, that was when he was kind of coming into his own. He was still a really young player, and his years after that in San Antonio were his best. And then for the Raptors, that was arguably peak Kawhi. But guess what? He only spent 1 year with the Raptors, and he led them to a championship in that 1 year. So Kawhi, and then, with the Clippers moving on after that Toronto season with the Clippers, you've got this great duo of him and Paul George, but it never really amounted to much. And now they moved on from Paul George, and that experiment just didn't work out. But so, yeah, Kawhi all time, I think his finals MVPs, it's really interesting how they come at times where you wouldn't expect them. But, I do not think the 2019 Raptors will have won without Kawhi. We need to give him all the flowers. He deserves all the flowers for that ring. And, you had other key contributors on that roster as well. But if you put DeMar in his place, Kawhi, you wouldn't have him. He's a good example of the best player to play for a franchise versus that franchise's best player. And you can still make an argument for a guy like Vince Carter. But there's also a very good case for Kawhi Leonard being the best player to suit up and wear a Raptors uniform. But is he the franchise's best player? Absolutely not. Because a guy like Vince Carter, he put Toronto on the map. And guys like Kyle Lowry, even DeMar DeRozan, they were there for a long time. And they didn't win any rings, but they put that city on their back. And so that's the difference kind of between a franchise's best player and the best player to suit up for that franchise. And I think another case of that is Dwyane Wade versus LeBron James for the Miami Heat, because Dwyane Wade is the best Miami Heat player of all time, but LeBron is the best player to play for the Miami Heat. But the reason I want to talk about Dwyane Wade right now is because he's going to get his statue for the Miami Heat on October 27th. And I'll go more in depth about him then, kind of talk about his legacy all time. I think D Wade gets underrated all time because the shooting guard position is just so stacked. You've got a top 2 player of all time in Michael Jordan. You've got Kobe Bryant, who isn't that far behind him. And there's just so much talent at the shooting guard position that a guy like D Wade, even though he's definitively top 5, I would argue top 3, he kind of gets lost in that conversation because there's so much talent at that position in terms of best shooting guards of all time. But D Wade, he's up there with all of them. He really can compete with the best of them in his prime, and he's a Miami Heat legend. He deserves that statue. Thursday Night Football, and the Bills thoroughly dominated the Miami Dolphins. They won 31-10, and Josh Allen didn't even have to do much. The Miami Dolphins, they picked off Tua 3 times, and then one of them going for a pick 6. So just in general, it was a great showing for the Bills. A team a lot of people coming into the year were kind of down on because they had lost their wide receiver, their top one, Stephon Diggs, and lost a couple other key veterans, and it's understandable why people thought that. But this team, there's a reason they were juggernauts in the AFC for so long, and they're still going to be right up there. But I want to focus on the Miami Dolphins and Tua for this portion, because now there's been calls from the public that, hey, maybe it's time to hang up the cleats. And Tua, he went out in this game with a concussion, and he's just dealt with so many concussion, injuries over his time in the NFL, that it is a valid concern. And even if it is, a very, very valid concern, I think it's ultimately up to Tua. Obviously, the general public isn't going to decide for him that he's going to retire. And, it would be a shame to see because he was in the, I believe, 2020 draft. So we're only 4 years removed from that. And he's just now, becoming what he is as a player, and that's borderline top 10 QB. So it would really be a shame to see Tua retire this young. But, at some point you do have to put the rest of your life before a short NFL career, because the average NFL career is 3.3 years. And yes, that takes into account everyone. So obviously there's a lot of outliers, and the mainstays are going to stick around a little bit longer. But generally, Tua has technically had a longer career than most NFL players. So you're very blessed with that. And if Tua was to retire, he is very well off financially still. He wouldn't need necessarily to, stay in the NFL if it's not good for his long-term health, because he's got the $42 million signing bonus and I believe $130 million guaranteed, something like that. So he's making around $170 million regardless, even if he chose to retire, right here and now, because he decides, hey, this isn't worth the long-term effects on my health. And for Tua, I would hate to see him retire, and I don't think he is, just by virtue of that same thing, because he's worked his whole life towards this. He went to Alabama, to be the QB for one of the best college teams in the nation. And now he goes to the NFL. He was a top 10 pick to the Miami Dolphins, a huge market out there. So I think Tua, he's worked his whole life to be a quarterback at the NFL level. So even if you do suffer multiple head injuries, it's difficult to actually decide to step away from the game, whether or not it's the best for your health. That is up to you. But I think the general consensus is that might be better for his health, but do I think he'll step away? No. And you can make an argument for either side on whether he should or he shouldn't. He's had a history of these head injuries since coming into the league. And originally, I believe after the 2022 season, doctors had told him that despite the first couple concussions he had, he wasn't at an elevated risk compared to the others. But, we've seen just numerous since then. So it really does put it into perspective. And if he was to stay around, how much does that affect his play? Is he going to be really conservative, or is he going to try to get the ball really quick to avoid, any pass rush? So I think it alters the mental game as well in terms of how he plays. So it's a very interesting situation, because talent-wise, no, it's not time to step away. But in terms of your physical ability and also maybe the mental aspect of it, it could be time, and that's ultimately up to him. But I think this time, after the 2022 season, he said that he had no thoughts about retiring, that he still had so much love for the game. And I think that love for the game is still there. But after so many concussions and head injuries, I think there is a point where you do have to consider, and I would hate for Tua to retire, but I do think it's a possibility, and this game really showed that with his history of concussions. And that's all for today. Yeah, thank you for listening. This has been State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts.